Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath with Forbes Breaking News. On Tuesday at midnight, dock workers up and down the East Coast and stretching into the Gulf went on strike due to stalled negotiations over pay and automation concerns. Joining us now to talk about what this means for global supply chains is David Warrick. He is the EVP of Overhaul, and he led supply chains at Microsoft globally for 23 years. David, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, Maggie, and thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for beaming in from the West Coast, where workers are not on strike. So you guys are faring a bit better than those of us on the East Coast. But let's start broadly with where we are with the strike. Workers went on strike at midnight on Tuesday. It doesn't appear that there's been any movement in the ensuing days. What's your take on where things stand right now?
It's a complex time. I think that the International Longshoremen's Association, they're demanding a pay increase. They're demanding a cease to automation activities. The United States Maritime Alliance, which represents the container carriers, the terminals, the marine terminal operators, they've made an offer. The White House has put some pressure on them, but the sides are still very far apart. And certainly there was some expectation that this was going to be a challenge, coming through the summer. I think the last set of talks broke down in June. And so there was some expectation that this was going to happen. But even since Tuesday, there doesn't seem to be any movement. There doesn't seem to be any negotiations back on the table. And it seems very much to be a standoff.
What are you doing at Overhaul to prepare in this environment? We can talk about the specific ramifications, but broadly speaking, if talks broke down in June, have you been putting protections in place to help keep your business running?
Overhaul is we're all about data, and we're all about understanding the flow of cargo through the supply chain, as well as monitoring it for risk and theft. And, our belief is that cargo at rest is cargo at risk. So anytime that you see a buildup in supply chain of containers with cargo, that's going to be a highlight for criminal activity. That's going to increase the risk from a supply chain perspective. So we've been working with our customers to understand what the impacts would be of an East Coast and Gulf Coast shutdown. We've been talking to them about scenarios of moving to potential West Coast, or indeed how they think about moving inventory, because this isn't just a problem now. It's going to be a knock-on effect problem whereby even when the ports open back up, there's still going to be a backlog, and that's going to take some time to recover. The analysts are saying at the minute that for every 1 day of stoppage, it's going to take somewhere between 4 to 6 days to recover that 1 day of stoppage. So already 3 days into the strike, we're talking 15 to 16, 17 days of recovery time. So whenever the strike ends, and it will end at some point, all willing, the strike will end, but then the recovery has to happen. And so our ability to give our customers visibility to understand where their containers are, where their cargo is, and how quickly they can move that to the location it was supposed to get to, that's kind of what we're focused on right now, as well as just monitoring the overall situation. We're starting to see ships building up outside the ports of New York, outside the ports of Savannah. And again, even when those ships actually come into berth, then you still have to perform dredge. You've got to move that cargo around. So there is going to be a knock-on effect. And those delays are the things that we really watch out for.
What are your customers doing right now? Are they already diverting to the West Coast, and are you seeing traffic pick up? And also, do you have customers in perishable and non-perishable goods, or is it one more than the other?
So probably more on the non-perishable. And to be honest, because there was a little bit of foresight into this may come to a head as it has done this week, a lot of customers had actually put a lot of preparation into this. So they had been actually diverting some shipments earlier through the summer. They'd also been building inventory a little bit earlier than normal in preparation for holiday season and a potential disruption. To be honest, the perishable side of it is a little bit more difficult because the supply chain is a little bit shorter. And when you think about the East Coast, it's a little bit scary in terms of 75% of banana imports come in through the East Coast, 90% of cherries, 80% of chocolate. These are all things that I enjoy myself, so I'm very concerned. But again, our customers have had some amount of foresight, which is fantastic, and supply chain visibility has played a key element in that to be able to scenario plan. What did we learn from 2020? What did we learn from 2021? It was that supply chains are fragile, and your ability to have visibility into how your supply chain is flowing, how your cargo is flowing, allows you to make preemptive decisions to hopefully avert some of the knock-on impacts of a gray swan or a black swan event.
Based on what you're seeing from your clients and their visibility and the insights that you have, has America's corporate environment, have America's businesses and supply chains learned from 2020 and 2021?
That's a beautiful question, Maggie. I think the answer to that is we're still learning. I think that we talk a lot about resilience. I think that we also become complacent very quickly. As soon as everything goes back to normal, it's like, well, yeah, that was really bad, but now we'll move on. But we're learning. I sit in a number of different industry forums, with supply chain leaders. Everybody's very aware that we have, our supply chains are fragile. We have to be better at understanding how to be agile, how to cope with these disruptions. And technology will play a large part in that. Technology is going to help us transform supply chain to be not only resilient, but to be more predictive and to be able to think about these decisions that have to be made in case something bad happens. So supply chains are becoming more agile. Technology is playing a big role. Have we got to where we should be? Not yet. Are we working on it? Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned that Overhaul's technology monitors for potential supply chain theft. And you also mentioned that ships are coming into New York, Savannah, and are stuck. Does the theft happen at that point where they get stuck, or does it happen a little later down the line? And I ask because earlier this week we spoke to an analyst who said that companies have kind of been stockpiling. So is it those stockpile reserves where there is a risk for theft?
I mean, thieves are very good at understanding how supply chains work, and they understand where the high value cargo is. And so they're continually watching. So when the supply chain gets disrupted, what happens is there is that knock-on effect, and it causes some level of confusion. Thieves love confusion. So whenever there is a surge in activity or everything has to happen in an expedited manner because we're trying to recover from a disruption, that is just a beautiful scenario for the criminal gangs. And this isn't opportunistic theft. This is organized crime. This is not a one-off type of thing. Organized crime are watching the supply chains. They're really watching where the high-value cargo is at rest and where the greatest opportunity is to be able to, if you like, jump in. And so what we do is we continually monitor not only the ports, but all of the routes across the US and globally, but mainly in the US right now. And we're watching for those hotspots. We work very closely with law enforcement in terms of criminal activity. And we're watching where there is starting to be a stockpile of high inventory goods, because that will eventually move into the retail channel. So with our customers, we're continually trying to avoid that risk. We're making sure that they're aware of where we see criminal activity and where there is opportunistic concepts for those criminal gangs. We try to be predictive, but when we can't be predictive, we're overcautious in terms of monitoring. And again, working with local law enforcement and the cargo crime task forces, we're getting really good at understanding that criminal activity, and we're putting in place as many preventative measures as we can, because we don't want the theft to happen. And if we can prevent it, that's exactly what we're all about.
As we talk about this strike and look at the number of types of goods that could be affected, there's non-perishable, there's perishable, and then there's high value non-perishable, like car parts, technology parts. What most concerns you? What area of imported goods are you watching the most in terms of type?
I mean, from a theft perspective, any high value good that can be moved in a secondary market, that's what we are all about. From an overall perspective, I think that the East Coast is very much, to your point, it's focused on the automotive industry, a lot of machine parts, furniture, a lot of softer goods coming in from Europe in particular. Those are industries that are going to probably feel a little bit more of the pinch, as well as the perishable goods coming in. But again, the big retailers have made some preparations. They were bringing in some of that inventory earlier. So I don't think we're going to see an instant disruption. I think depending on how long the strike continues will absolutely depict the level of disruption that consumers will actually face. And, back to the pricing point as well. Are we going to see price increases immediately? No. The longer the strike goes on, is it going to put pressure on supply chains and consumers? Of course it will, because that's just the nature of supply chain.
It's that, of course it will, that concerns me, because consumers are still reeling from the effects of inflation over the last few years. It kind of feels like you can't get a break. But David, I want to ask you, I started this conversation by saying that you had 2 decades of experience at Microsoft leading global supply chains. What from that role are you taking as you analyze the current environment? Did you see a strike when you had that job, and how did we get through that moment?
I mean, I was there for 23 years. That's a long time. I saw a lot of different disruptions from, environmental impacts due to the huge storms, through to, container companies going bankrupt overnight and stranding inventory around the world. What did I learn? Always prepare for the unexpected. We had an old saying, which was plan for success, mitigate for failure. And typically, it's human nature to always plan for the success and spend your time there. But the real benefit in supply chain is actually to spend your time mitigating for failure, thinking through those different scenarios, and then putting in place a playbook which is almost extreme in terms of what could go wrong. But then when something does go wrong, it's an automatic reaction, and we were able to jump on it and move things very quickly. So and I've now been in supply chain 30 years. I work with a lot of early stage companies and a lot of corporations, through my work now with Overhaul. And it's really fascinating, just the jump in technology. I wish I'd had some of the visibility technology and some of that predictive artificial intelligence, 15 years ago, whenever I was facing real challenges in terms of global events. But it is what it is. We got through it at the time. And now I'm just excited about, disruptions are sometimes catalysts for supply chain innovation. And that seems like the wrong thing to be saying, but it's true. Whenever we're backed into a corner, and whenever we actually have to face some of these, cataclysmic events, then it actually is a drive for innovation. It makes supply chain realize again that we are fragile. We need to work in a different way, and we need to be able to protect the consumer and protect American businesses whenever things don't go as planned. So I actually, as much as I don't like disruption, I get excited by it a little bit, Maggie, because I know it's going to drive a wave of innovation.
So I'll ask, what is the innovation that could come from this moment? As I think about the ships that are outside of New York Harbor, is there an innovation we can implement to get the goods off those ships right now?
Not exactly. However, what it will show us is the fact that a lot of companies actually predicted a disruption. The fact that a lot of companies started moving inventory in a different way wasn't by chance. That was because technology enabled them to start to predict what a supply chain disruption would actually mean for them. What does that mean going forward? It means that they're going to look at their networks. They're going to look at how dependent they are on certain locations, or on certain carriers, or on certain ways of importing or exporting. Because don't forget, it's not just the imports that have shut down, it's also the exports. And 56% of our raw cotton is exported through the East Coast ports. A lot of our poultry exports go through the East Coast ports as well. So it's two sides on the supply chain. And the learning is going to be, how good were we at predicting? How well did that play out in terms of being able to, if you like, absorb the disruption? And then are we looking really, really clearly at our networks to say, how do we become more agile? How are we going to be able to make sure that this isn't going to be a problem going forward? And those are the things that I look for and say, this is really clever. And now technology will step in and help us build those predictive models in an even better way.
That import point is a really important point. As a consumer, I think I've been focusing on export point is a good getting all twisted thinking about how much traffic there will be at the ports. But David, I want to ask you, as you talk to either early stage companies or more developed and established companies, what is the number one question you're hearing from your clients right now?
I mean, everybody wants to know how long will this go on, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't answer that question. I think the sides are very far apart, and I hope that, you know, in true sense, they will reach an agreement, and we will be able to get back to normal. I think that you know, the big question is, you know, to your earlier point, were we prepared? Have we learned our lessons from 2020? Have we learned our lessons from 2021? What was different this time, and are we better? And I think that you know, to a certain extent, the jury is still out. I think that we were better, but we had more intuition in this one. We could see that something was coming. It wasn't a direct black swan event without any notification. Have we got to the level that we should have got to? My judgment would be absolutely not. But I do hope that this will really help supply chains think differently and move forward.
What is the biggest thing that concerns you right now? We're only 3 days after this strike officially took effect. It feels like it could be early days in this. Is there something we haven't discussed that's keeping you up at night in regards to this situation?
You know, it's the obvious answer, Maggie. It's the obvious answer that if this continues for too long, it's going to have a much bigger impact. And that bigger impact is going to have a very significant knock-on effect for the economy, for consumers, for everything at the stage where we are with the economy, where we're just about holding steady. We don't need this right now. And that's you know, that's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is that this does not resolve itself in the relative short term.
And finally, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs who watch and read Forbes content, what is your advice to the entrepreneurs running businesses big and small in this moment?
I think it is, you know, be aware, be present, understand the implications, look for ways to be creative, and also, you know, look for the lessons learned. Look for how the big companies are behaving in this matter, because they have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So the big companies are, you know, they were moving inventory earlier. They were thinking about switching to different ports. They were doing all of those things. As a small company, as an entrepreneur, it's no different. You have to start thinking about different ways of actually managing your supply chain, and you have to be creative in that respect. And I think it is a good lesson from that perspective. But it's also you know, a chance to look at, you know, stranded inventory. So you may have inventory in other parts of the US which you thought was in a good place, but maybe now you should have it in a different location. Those are the types of questions which start to become really interesting. And for early stage companies in particular, it is watch the events, understand the implications, and then think about, how do you differentiate? How can you be an assistance in this type of scenario where there is a disruption? This is, you know, the one that we have today is the East Coast, but supply chain disruptions are normal. They're common. They happen every time. You know, there's a typhoon in Taiwan right now. There was, you know, obviously the hurricane last week, which caused massive devastation. All of these things are supply chain disruptions. So it's not a one-off thing. As an early stage company, how do you think about your ability to absorb those disruptions and actually create an impact and do something that will further support the evolution of supply chain?
David Warrick, EVP of Overhaul, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insight. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Maggie.